Ed Olson, great to see you, my friend. How are you?
Hey Tom, how are you? I'm great.
Good, good. We've known each other for a few years now. We did some work together, and I'm just excited to have you on our podcast today. You are, at least in my mind, one of the top probably 10 folks in the world who are leading and doing autonomous vehicle work. And you guys aren't just talking about the theory of it and sort of the science project aspect of it, like a lot of companies are. You guys have been doing it. You've had vehicles on the road for years now that are truly autonomous. And so, why don't we start there? Just give us a status of where we are in late 2021 when it comes to autonomous vehicles.
Well, I think we're all sort of slowly figuring out that autonomous vehicles are really hard, and lots of dollars are going into it because the opportunity is so great. It's attracting a lot of capital and a lot of interest. I think what we've been doing is trying to figure out what's a more incremental approach towards building an AV company. Sort of, instead of going off into a corner and going into research mode for 4 or 5 years, and then eureka, we've got the product. Our MO is much more, let's build something, let's get it out to a customer, let's see what we can learn about it, and let's use that to iterate really fast. And that's what we've been doing over the last few years.
And quite successfully. Every time I check into LinkedIn, you guys are adding a new city or somewhere in the world. I know you've launched in Japan, I think it was earlier this year. I know you've gotten millions, tens of millions of dollars from different companies like Toyota. So how are you guys doing, and what's making you successful, you think?
Well, I think one of the things that weighs very heavily on me is, why do people come to May? Because there are other AV companies out there, and anyone at our company could be somewhere else. They're choosing to be here for a reason. And oftentimes we work them harder. They could go somewhere else and work less hard and probably make the same money. So what keeps them at May? And that's been a really important thing for me to wrap my head around. And it comes down to the mission of the company. They're here because there's an itch that they have that we can scratch, that they can't get scratched as easily anywhere else. And so I want to keep people here and motivated by our mission, which I kind of skipped past. But the thing that we're really excited about is not just AVs, but AVs as a way of transforming cities. So you travel a fair amount. You experience, like, you go out to, you're on the road, you're in a hotel room, you look out the window, and what do you see when you look out the hotel room?
Hmm. Depends on where I am, but a whole lot of cars and a whole lot of concrete.
Yeah, and I hate it because you can look out your window and there's like the Eiffel Tower, something amazing, and it's surrounded by streets and parking and lots of transportation that doesn't serve anyone very well. And the same thing's very true here in the Detroit area as well, that there's just a huge amount of real estate devoted to expensive, inefficient infrastructure. And the exciting thing, and I think the reason that people come to work for May, is because we can see a future where cities can be more walkable, more friendly, more quieter, where you can sit down at a cafe on the outside under a tree with quiet mixed mode traffic calmly driving by, kids playing on the sidewalk next to you, walking to school instead of taking a big school bus. And it's funny because none of those things say autonomous vehicles, but it's actually autonomous vehicles that make that kind of future city possible by really redefining what the economics of transportation systems are. And that is something that I think appeals a lot to May. I like to say that we're trying to build a company of missionaries rather than mercenaries.
I love it. I love it. There was an interesting image that just popped in my head, and we worked with you guys for quite some time and helped you with a lot of that mission discussion. And it's not about the mission statement. It's about how do you bring that alive into people's imaginations. But for the first time ever, I had this image of like you brought the Eiffel Tower, being in a city like Paris. And usually the traffic really is so loud. You've got the engine noise, you've got people honking, you've got people cutting each other off. it's almost deafening if you're close to the road. And now for the first time, I actually saw this image of like being just as close to the transportation, but at, a third or less of the actual volume. I love that imagery. That's really cool.
Yeah, and I think it's achievable because a lot of the sound, the volume comes from speed. And if you can have an efficient flow of vehicles, it turns out like 20 miles per hour is enough to get you anywhere you want to go in Manhattan in a fraction of the time that it takes you to get there today. Today, there's so much congestion. The average speed of a taxi in Manhattan is 4.7 miles per hour. But if you could actually have the traffic calmly flowing at 20 miles an hour, you get there in 25% the time. And cars traveling at 20 miles per hour are not loud, especially the kinds of electric vehicles that we are focusing on.
Fascinating. So help us neophytes who aren't in the top 10 when it comes to autonomous vehicles and all this work understand what that means. So what do you mean by a more efficient pace of 20 miles per hour? What would that actually look like?
Well, I think the number one problem that we have is that transportation planners know the transportation problems that they face in their cities today. But they don't always have the right tools to solve those transportation problems. Some cities, some transportation planners might have subways or light rail to play with, but a lot of them really only have buses. Now, if you think back to yourself, the last time you saw a bus, how many people were on that bus? Probably not very many. Most of the buses that we see, even in Ann Arbor, are nearly empty. And the problem with that is, there's a reason for that. Oftentimes that they don't provide the level of service that attracts ridership. The buses are expensive. They can only be in one place at a time. And so the transportation planners have to do the best they can with a small number of buses because they can't afford any more. But the result is a relatively low level of service that most riders are not excited about. And you or I, we can afford to take a Lyft or an Uber. We can afford to sit in the back seat with our laptop and hack away on emails while we're stuck in traffic rather than take the bus. But what that does is it actually makes everything worse because we're contributing to congestion at the same time that we're not helping promote the public transit services. So to answer your question, what I'm envisioning here is a transportation system that actually appeals to a very broad section of the population: the affluent, the poor, the disabled, the kids going to school. Because if you can provide a transportation system that appeals to a broad market, then you can end up in a place where you can afford to invest in a public transit system that works, that's scalable, that keeps cities solvent, and is a service that you and I would choose to ride instead of taking a Lyft or an Uber.
Yeah, because it's accessible. We know the impact, and we're all, sort of society at large is benefiting from that. What's that future look like when you think of maybe interstate transit? Talking about the United States, for instance. I just went on a trip with my family for my in-laws' 50th wedding anniversary, and we went out of state. So
awesome.
Talk about that. What will that future look like?
Well, I think out of the gate, it's going to be a while before autonomous vehicles can make interstate travel, just because of the amount of freeway and validation required to cover those kinds of distances. But an interesting question would be if people start giving up personal car ownership because their day-to-day transportation needs are met better by taking a May shuttle than by owning a personal car, then that might actually shift their interest to looking at trains and other modes of transportation. That instead of driving to Chicago, you might choose to take the train. And maybe if you and a lot of other people are choosing to take the train, there would be better trains. And so there could be a lot of positive impacts once we can really make the case that individual car ownership is not the best solution for many people.
Yeah, it's a complete mind shift. You can get to those Euro trains where we can get from Detroit to Chicago instead of 4 or 5 hours in a car. You can get there in an hour and a half on a train because it's a bullet train.
And today it's a very pleasant 4 to 10 hour train ride.
That's no joke, Ed. I got my MBA. I was still living in the Detroit area, but I was getting it in Chicago, and so every other weekend I'd jump on the Amtrak. Almost every other weekend. Sometimes I drive, and it was great by and large. But there was a few times where, you know, passengers are second class citizens. You know, the freight trains actually are first priority, and there were a few times where that 4 hour, 5 hour trip took 12 hours.
Yeah.
And you're stuck on a train. So we're a long way to go from that future, but it is exciting to think about. You know, as we're on a culture podcast, we're on a leadership podcast, so we could spend the entire time talking about sort of the autonomous vehicle component of this. But I want to bring it back to that mission and, you know, that imagery that you planted in our heads around that future. And just talk a little bit about, why is that mission important to you personally? What is it about that gets you excited?
Yeah, well, you know, I didn't start off as a transit geek. You know, I started off really with a passion for technology and applying technology to real world problems, and that for me provides enough energy to keep me going and excited. What I realized as I was starting May is that building cool stuff and getting it into market is only really part of the picture, and that you can start to flesh out the mission of the company from build really cool things and get it out of market into ways that start to bring in other parts of your brain that start to appeal to, like, actually, you know, life could be better, cities could be safer, pedestrians, wouldn't it be great if I could if my kids could walk to school rather than taking a bus? And so bringing in all of those ideas and packaging them into a mission statement that's hopefully inspiring, that gets people excited about what we're doing, is a great way to recruit people to the company and to align us around what's really important.
Mm-hmm. And what do you do with that on a weekly basis? How do you continue to, because we would argue that the mission statement at best is a reminder of the mission that you're on. You know, it's at best. Very few mission statements kind of get people inspired or excited. So how do you go about putting that into your team's imaginations? How do you remind them of the mission that you're on in a regular way?
You know, I think a failure mode of many mission and vision and value statements is that they go up on the wall, and then that's the end of the discussion about the mission and the vision and the value. Do you have a mission, vision, value? Check. And that doesn't cut it. It's a little surprising to me how often we keep coming back to it. We need to keep coming back to it. One reason is because we're growing really, really fast. And there are people who haven't heard me talk about looking out the window and seeing parking structures rather than parks. And so repeating it is really important. And the other thing that I think is really important is, you know, how do you build a company that can scale? And I think there's actually a deep connection between the scalability of a company and establishing a clear mission, vision, and value statement. And that comes down to, like, how a company makes decisions. When our company was very, very small, we had basically two ways of making decisions. Like, the six of us would get around a table, and we would sometimes decide by a consensus. And sometimes we would decide by asking me what the decision is. And neither of those are very scalable. Right? As the company gets bigger and we're making hundreds of decisions a day, and now we're 190 people, we can't, yeah, I know, we keep getting bigger and bigger. Neither of those decision making.
Just for the listeners out there, when we started working together, which I think was about 2 years ago, Ed, you were not even half of that. And so yeah, that's just phenomenal growth.
It's a lot to stay in front of. But, you know, with 190 people, you can't make decisions in the same way. They can't all come back to me, and we can't all gather around the table to decide by consensus. And so the question is, how do you make decisions? And I think it's about being able to delegate. So you need to be able to decentralize your decision making, empower your leaders to make decisions. But how do you do that? how do you know if you're the CEO that your VP is going to make the right call, that they're going to make something that you would be comfortable with? And that's what points right back to mission, vision, and values. If you are aligned on the mission and vision and the values of the company, it gives you a framework to believe that your team are going to make good decisions without you having to be there. And so that's really been the thing that I've been trying to channel, because of course there are engineers. We have a lot of engineers. A lot of them listen to this sort of mission, vision, values stuff, and kind of you see the eyes rolling like, mission, vision, values. And I actually say, I get that, but think about how you scale decision making. And I explain what I just did now, and they're like, oh, okay. And the door is open at that point to talk about how we align in advance on what's important so that we can later on make decisions independently.
Yeah, you're providing a framework and a system through which people can make millions of decisions, and not having to script every single decision. That's the difference between, I think, an organization that empowers its people and pushes the decisions down to the front line as close as possible, and those that are stuck in micromanagement land.
Yeah, and it's still hard, right? You still worry, like, are all the decisions going to be made the right way? But this is the beginning, right? This is how you can start to establish that decentralization, and after a while, you start to realize that, like, hey, it seems to be working pretty well, and it makes it easier to lean into.
Well, talk about your own journey there, Ed, because obviously I'm privy to it. So share whatever you're comfortable sharing, but talk about your own journey in this sort of evolution that you've gone through as a CEO and as a leader.
Well, so I've told this story before, but when I first started, I'm a first-time CEO. The reality is I don't really know what I'm doing, and you rely on tropes, on like things you've seen on TV, things you've read, works of fiction on what a CEO is supposed to do. And there's this model of what a CEO is or should be. Liberal air quotes here, should be. The CEO who knows everything, is an amazing problem solver, can solve any problems. There's a conference room. People are arguing. They don't know how to get the sales numbers up. What happens? The CEO goes into the room, says, "Don't worry, I'm here. I've got this. You do this, you do that. Ha, problem solved. See you later." And just triumph after triumph. And that's not a good model.
That is truly a work of fiction.
It is. And you add to it doubt about whether you really know what you're doing, because of course you don't know what you're doing. Nobody's ever built May Mobility before. Even experienced CEOs would be in the deep end on a new company with new problems. You add in insecurities about, are people going to worry that Ed doesn't know the answers? That is this company going to be adrift? Are we all going to go down if Ed doesn't know the answer? And a lot of those sorts of weights, can bring out that kind of behavior of feeling like this is the part that I've been cast to play, the person who's going to come in and know all of the answers. But like you said, it doesn't work. It's a disaster. It led to challenges at May, led to a lot of bumpy conversations. And it's something I've really had to learn from and try to figure out what is my role as a CEO. And I mean, it sounds so stupid, but it's not all a cognitive exercise. A lot of it is like that reptile brain that's telling you stupid things, trying to you eventually have to just yell down the reptile brain, which says, "It's okay, Ed, if you don't always know the answers."
Mm-hmm. So what's the status of Ed today? If that's you a couple of years ago, where you're kind of this superhero that has all the answers, and where are you today in that journey from a leadership perspective?
It's you're never done. So you can kind of come around one corner and then then realize that there's another hill in front of you. But I feel like I've come a long way. I feel like my team is functioning at a level that is really extraordinary and really exciting. And the best thing about it is that it's not like a endless slog where every hill is steeper than the last one you just got on. You start to see the positive aspects of, you make some changes and good things happen. And you're like, hell yeah, I want more of that. And you just kind of start working the feedback loop. And yeah, there's still challenges, and there's still times when we're trying to figure out when we got a really hard a hard decision to make. How are we going to navigate that? Who's going to make the final call? That's hard. It's going to keep being hard, but it gets easier all the time.
Yeah, and I think if I were to underline anything in that you said you're never done, and I think that's so critical. I think especially for young leaders out there who are learning this whole leadership thing. I know for me, I thought, well, I just need to figure it out. Once I figure it out, then I'll have it mastered. And that delusion got me in a lot of trouble. What I've shifted to over my life is that leadership is an infinite journey. That we're never going to get there. We're just going to keep getting better and better and better. And so long as we're better than we were last week, then that's all we really need to care about is focusing on continuous improvement.
100%. And I think, challenging yourself, knowing where you are weak, where you can you stand to grow, and kind of leaning into it is really important. I think one of the things I do reasonably well is get people excited about May and what we do and why it matters. And we talked about sort of leadership, management, and coaching. I think I'm pretty good at that sort of leadership inspiration thing. I think I'm okay at coaching. And I think I'm pretty abysmal on the management side. And that's a place where my Minnesota nice really works against me. Management being so important about getting people to sign up for things, being accountable, and committing to dates and being responsible for the work that they do. And for someone who's Minnesota nice, that can be squarely in the crosshairs of conflict of saying, Tom, you said you would have the report ready for me last week, and it's not here. And inside my brain is shouting like, just give him more time. Like the easiest thing in the world would be to just, not have the conversation. And so that's an example of a place where, I continue to work.
Yeah. We haven't told you this yet, but we started working with 3 new clients in Minnesota. So we are inundated with Minnesota nice right now. And so for the listeners, Ed is from Minnesota. So that's why he's using that idea that up there in the Midwest, really, I think, but in Minnesota in particular, there's this idea of being nice, which is different than being kind. Nice is much more sort of you're dancing around the issue, whereas kind is you're going right at stuff because you care about the other person and you want to get stuff done. You're much more willing to be direct. And I know Ed's been working on that and working on his management muscle there, because that is critical. I love that you brought up leadership management and coaching, because I know where you learned that from. That's some of our bread and butter here in the work that we do. Leadership, as you talked about, is sort of the inspirational stuff. Management's all about getting stuff done, getting people to make promises, and then following up on those promises, holding each other accountable, all that. And then there's coaching, the third leg of the stool. And I know you said you're okay at that, but I think you're probably underestimating your own talents there and the May culture, because I know you guys were coaching each other and you've come a long way compared to where you were even just a couple of years ago. And I know at one point you said that you see improving that and continuously improving the coaching culture as one of your key advantages that you'll have over other organizations out there. So what does that mean? Why do you think having a coaching culture is so important?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'll speak selfishly first that I am a first-time CEO. I love this job. I hope to still be the right person for this job 5 years from now. But if I'm going to grow professionally to be able to do that well and be really the right person, the number one person in the world to continue to lead May in its 5-year future from here, I got a lot of growth to do. There's a lot of stuff I got to learn about. And if I can get the people who work around me to coach me and help me identify where I'm doing well and where I need to focus, and where maybe I'm just completely screwing up, then that is the best way for me to be successful in achieving my goals, which is to continue to grow and be the right person to lead the company. And so even though I don't like being told when I'm not doing things right, I see the essentialness of that to my own goals and aspirations. And it doesn't take a big leap from there to imagine that other people are probably in a similar spot, right? That they have goals and aspirations. They probably would benefit from the expertise. We have an amazing team here at May. And if everyone was really behind everyone else, pushing, contributing, helping them know, helping them improve and encouraging them towards professional growth, you could imagine basically everybody sort of maxing out what they can achieve, right? Fully manifesting their ability. And that's a recipe for not just like individual success, but corporate success. I want everyone at the company to be the biggest, most accomplished version of what they can achieve. And we can only get there if we can have real conversations where we can help and support each other, both on the good side and places where there's need for improvement.
And how are you guys doing at that? How do you go about coaching each other? Because there's a lot of confusion out there, I think, around what coaching is versus feedback versus mentoring. I read a great article the other day that said somebody's saying to you, and they've actually studied this in the brain, that someone saying to you, "Can I give you some feedback?" is akin to hearing footsteps in the dark behind you. That it triggers the same sort of emotional and brain reaction from your amygdala. So that's very different than a truly supportive, what I'll call loving culture, where we're actually helping each other grow and improve every day. So how do you guys go about that?
Oh, this is super hard. The same thing like the are you open to some coaching kind of being a trigger. Same thing like when your manager or anyone calls you, wants to talk to you, and they say, Tom, one thing you do really well is, and you're like, oh crap, here comes the compliment sandwich, right? And you're just like, right? And it's involuntary because there are these sorts of recipes for providing feedback. And the other challenge is that there are legitimate management tasks of providing feedback. Like, you committed to do X, you did not do X. I'm holding you accountable for that. Mm-hmm. And that's not coaching. That's performance feedback. That's management. But we also struggle with people who think that anything that is negative or critical of their performance needs to be opt-in. And that's really a corrosive place to be too, because that just shuts down the ability to manage effectively. And if you can't give real feedback about how someone's doing, how do you get to the place where you can actually have a coaching conversation, to talk about like, hey, here's some things you might try. Here's how you can be more, how I think you could be more successful. So this is really hard. It's incredibly hard because we're all just people who are oftentimes insecure about what we're getting right, what we're getting wrong. We don't really like criticism. I think most of us are naturally conflict avoidant. So trying to, I'll answer this a different way. I'm kind of babbling, but one of the values of the company was written down explicitly to encourage these sorts of important conversations, whether especially on the management side, which is to invest in personal relationships, which to me means Tom, if I have a feedback for you, like, hey, that report was late, that's an uncomfortable conversation. There's a part of me that doesn't want to do that. The easiest thing in the world for me is to not do it. But the value is that I am willing to invest energy, invest my discomfort in having that conversation, because it's an investment in you and your professional growth and your well-being. It's almost selfish to not do that. Mm-hmm. And this is one of those values of the company that I think will forever be aspirational, right? We're never going to be able to put a checkbox in that we've mastered this, but it's there deliberately as a reminder that it takes an investment of energy. It takes putting yourself into uncomfortable places to move that value forward.
Yeah. Well, your example isn't hypothetical either. I mean, you and I have had conversations where it's been uncomfortable for both of us, right? But in so doing, we've helped each other grow and get better at our respective jobs. And we've done it because we were committed to helping the other person, not because we were committed to our own comfort. And so it's a great example that it's not easy. It's not always fun, but if you take your eye off of yourself and your own ego and how you feel and put your eye on, okay, what does this person need? How can I help them? It changes the whole game, I think.
I agree. Still makes it hard.
Yes.
I remember one of the things that you or Brad used to say, I think you would say, are you willing to have this difficult conversation with a person? And I think I said, no, I'm not comfortable doing it. And I think you said, I didn't ask if you were comfortable. I said, are you willing to do it?
Yes. A good coach isn't concerned about the person's comfort. They're concerned about the person's growth. And so those are very different. So what would you say to, this is all in the context of, shaping a high-performing culture and shaping a high-performing team, that, you've got these different tools in your tool belt. You've got leadership, you've got management, you've got coaching. We could spend another 2 hours and we spend months with our clients helping them really master these tools and helping them shape a high-performing culture. So we don't have time to fully get into it. But what would you say, based on your experience of the work, to a new maybe CEO out there who's a new startup CEO, or maybe even an existing startup CEO who's a few years in, the team is growing like crazy, and all of a sudden, they're saying, oh my gosh, I'm struggling. I don't know how to keep up with this. I don't know how to keep growing myself and keep growing my team. What advice would you give to those folks out there?
I think the first thing that pops to mind is almost that you don't need to expect this to be easy. You need permission to find. You don't need but I don't know what the right turn of phrase. But if it's hard, if you find it really exhausting, difficult, challenging, that's okay. That means you're like 100% of the other CEOs out there in the world. Mm-hmm. And so, for me, for example, having this caricature of the super confident CEO who has no insecurities, and can strut on stage and can solve problems with a wave of his hand and, a clever retort to every snarky comment. That's a hard thing to live up to, and I wouldn't want to anymore. But giving yourself permission to find it hard, to find it something that it's okay that you need to work on it. I think that is one of the most useful things. The other thing I found really useful is the teasing apart of the job into different dimensions, like the leadership, management, and coaching. I found it very emotionally hard to say, oh, I'm struggling. I must be a bad CEO. And sort of like spreading out, like, well, actually, what does leadership, what does being a CEO mean? Well, it actually means a couple different things. And I found it I found some psychological safety in being able to say, well, okay, I'm actually doing okay on this one. I probably wouldn't have ended up as a CEO if I wasn't good at one of these things. And then being able to sort of zero in on, okay, I need to work on this one a little bit, and this one I need to really focus on. So just kind of teasing apart what the job description is, what the space of being good versus needing to work on things, I found really helpful.
Yeah. So there's I think I heard two things in that. One is to give yourself permission that it's okay if it's hard. It's actually a good thing. It means you're human. Means you're a human CEO and not one of those robots. Which will
We're
make you
working on those.
which will make you a much more effective leader when it comes to other humans, by the way. And two, teasing apart the job and getting more specific. There's almost an equation to this work, that Brad and I are working on actually as we think about writing this. Well, as we go about writing a new book, what's the equation for creating a high performing team and a high performing culture? Because it can be boiled down into some component parts that are universal and they're frankly timeless too. The ideas of leadership, of management, of coaching, and how do you make these things conscious, and how do we become more conscious as leaders, and all those components go into shaping a high performing culture. But you got to start with a recognition that you, as a CEO, you don't have all the answers. I think that's critical. If you think you've got all the answers, then you're in trouble, and you need to reevaluate, because if you got all the answers, you're not going to be able to grow your team very far, in my opinion. What do you think?
I completely agree. If you want a team of really fantastic leaders with you, which of them are going to want to work for someone who always knows the right answer? A CEO who signals in everything that they do that you don't really need them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, the time's flying by, Ed. One more startup question, and then we'll wrap up maybe with a book recommendation. Startups are hard. My wife has obviously been working on one for a few years, and she's doing phenomenally well with Pocket Nest. But I watch her and I watch other startup founders. I think of you all the time, and the work you guys are doing is just, beyond impressive. But it's hard work. So what would you say to fellow startup CEOs out there about this work, about creating a high performing culture?
Oh, wow. It's hard. I think that's kind of the number one thing. But I think especially early on, I could see that I was modeling behaviors that I did not want in the company, right? And when the company was small, we got away with it, or I should say, I got away with it for a long time. And so even early on in the company, when you can get away with a lot of stuff like inefficient decision-making strategies, or you might have a more junior team that doesn't push back on some of the bad behaviors you might have. Trying to be very deliberate about how you want to grow the team, thinking about what kind of CEO you want to be, how you're going to support the growth of your team. And doing that early on is really important, because any problems that you sort of plant in the ground in the early days are just going to grow and become bigger problems as the company tries to scale.
Yeah, I love that. There's a lot there. I especially love this idea of how intentional are you about helping yourself grow and your team grow? Because if you're not doing that as a CEO, you're not doing one of your fundamental jobs, which is to grow your people. Because the only way you grow an organization is by growing your people. So whether it's a leadership forum of other CEOs, or it's work like Brad and I do, or it's somebody else like that, so critical that you're not having pretend like you got it all figured out. Go get some help. Go talk to people. Go talk to other CEOs. Go grow. Constantly learn and strive to get better every day.
Absolutely. Yep. And it starts, I think, day one, or at least with employee number 2.
So what book do you have for us?
Yeah. So, you actually mentioned earlier on that a lot of the ideas about leadership management and coaching are kind of timeless, that they they're not exactly new concepts. And when you gave me a heads up that I should think of a book to recommend, and I set a high bar, and I was thinking like, okay, which book kind of blew my mind? And I couldn't think of one, right? I couldn't think of a book that like fundamentally transformed the way I think. Like most of them are like, trust is good. Yeah, I agree. Accountability is good. Yeah, I'm with you. As I was thinking about this, what I eventually decided on is it's not any one book. It's sort of like, swimming down a swim lane, and you're getting these little waves that kind of bump you in different directions. And each book is just a little bit of a correction force that kind of steers you back to what you probably already knew or have read before, but that for some reason hadn't set its hook in you quite the right way. And I'm mixing metaphors in a horrific way. So with that in mind, what I thought I would do is just the books that came to mind that most recently kind of nudged me, had an influence, like, oh yeah, right, that's an important thing. Thinking Fast and Slow was one that jumped out at me. Five Dysfunctions of Teen was another one that I read recently. Four Disciplines of Execution, about goal setting. That one was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it. And then, less on leadership management and coaching. The Rebel Allocator was a fun read. Sprint, about the doing sprints, was a lot of fun. And Measure What Matters, which is actually a book that I don't love, but one that through reading it, I felt myself sort of nudged in a direction I thought was helpful. So kind of all over the place there, but I think the value of those books is actually, like, anytime you get advice, it's to scan the advice for what's worth, what resonates, what's the advice that you actually needed today, and to be open to that, and not treat any one of these books as a Bible.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's a great way to think about it. I like this idea of nudging you down the path, that every book you read can transform your life, and most people, I shouldn't say most, many people don't read a lot because they don't have quote unquote time. The reality is we all have time. We just got to pick how to use it. And just the discipline of reading even 10 or 15 minutes a day can literally be life-changing, whatever you're reading. But what I think I hear from you is just keep reading, keep seeking, keep trying to add knowledge to your repertoire, because every one of the books you read is gonna add to your life and make you a better leader, better parent, maybe a better son, better daughter, whatever. It's gonna make you a better human being.
I think that's right, and I think there's little nuggets in most of these books that might resonate with you. And next month it might be a different chapter. That was the one that was like, oh right, that's a good point. So yeah, kind of having a conversation with the books and seeing where they where they nudge you, or which advice kind of lands in your gut and is like, oh, I don't like that. That's an interesting question. So why don't you like that? And you might find you just wildly agree or disagree. But that's a fun, like being a curious reader.
Yeah. Be curious and be a lifelong reader. Just keep reading.
That's right.
I love it. Well, Ed, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks for the time. I appreciate it. And we will chat with you very soon, I'm sure.
Thanks so much, Tom. And looking forward to your book. Everybody should read it.
Yeah, that's right. Everyone go out and get our book that doesn't exist yet. We begin that journey in about 2 weeks. And so in about, who knows, 8 to 12 months from now, we'll have a book for everybody to fall asleep to. I mean, to read and devour when it's finally done. So
to nudge you just where you need to be nudged.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you.